This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by the Mariachi Ghost, live at Times Change, January 19.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. I'm here with my very special guest today,
Jorge Requena Ramos.
I will not roll my R's as eloquently as Jorge has, but he's a filmmaker and a writer and a director and a burgeoning comic book star and a musician, the frontman of Mariachi Ghost. Is that how you like to be introduced? All of
one
those
of
things?
the persons in Mariachi Ghost.
Yeah, one of the persons, because there's a lot of persons in that band.
A lot of persons in that band. Yeah.
Okay, and he's here to talk to us about, well, we're going to start. He started today when he came into the studio telling me about something that he called the Truth Pyramid. And I would be remiss not to just have him recap right now the Truth Pyramid, and then we'll hold ourselves to this standard.
Okay, great. The Truth Pyramid is the standard now. I like it. So the Truth Pyramid is something they use in philosophy of science to explain how reality works to people. So truth is something that is plastic. You can think of it as clay. You can mold it to whatever your personality is or whatever your life is or your life situations are. And it can always change. So you can change your, when people talk about their truth, they can change their truth constantly through life, right? And somebody else's truth is going to be different than your truth, no matter what. So in this way, Jesus is true in the same way that Buddha is true or Muhammad is true, right? And all three of them can be true at the same time or not, depending on who you are. Then that's the top level of the pyramid. That is all kind of pending on the second level of the pyramid, which is the furthest the human brain can reach. It's called certainty. Certainty requires proof. So our scientific knowledge is based in certainty, the principle of certainty. So we are certain of something because we were able to demonstrate it repeatedly to ourselves, right? So we're certain that we're in a collective experience as humans because we have collective experiences repeatedly. We have measured time. We have measured space.
This is like Baudrillard. The real is only that which can be recreated.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. I'm with you so far then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's reality. And then basically reality is unchangeable. We have no access to it. We can only live in it, right? And so we don't necessarily even need to understand it. Certainty allows us a certain amount of understanding of reality, but it doesn't mean that we can fully grasp reality. And the human brain isn't designed for reality. It's designed for certainty and for truth, but it's not designed for actually understanding what reality is. With our brain capacity, we're never going to be able to understand all of reality in the entire universe, right? We can't. We can hope to, and we should hope to.
Which leads us towards truth through certainty, but doesn't allow for objective. No, I guess truth would be objective. It wouldn't allow for truth and certainty to occupy the same place. I love this. Okay, so how do you apply this to your own work? Let's just call you a creative person, right? Because you don't get bored, you said earlier.
Yeah.
You just do lots of stuff.
As long as I'm not bored, it's great.
That's good. So how do you let the fact that when you're picking a project or when you're working with creative people, how does this Truth Pyramid help you out?
For example, in the band, there is at every point in time 8 different sounds that are being put into the music.
Okay, so just let's pause for a moment. In a short summation, tell our listeners about Mariachi Ghost.
The Mariachi Ghost is a band that mixes Mexican traditional song and psychedelic prog-rock and creates a mise-en-scène that is a kind of a theatrical show that takes you to Old Mexico, through the ghosts of Old Mexico, and creates this very passionate, very tangible feeling of otherness on the stage. sense?
That makes a lot of sense, especially in context of this, the way that you set up our show so far. Okay, so you're looking at both cultural truth, spiritual truth, intellectual truth, all through the presentation of music.
Yeah.
And you yourselves, there's 8 of you in the band, you said? Yeah. And I've seen you live a few times, and I'm constantly blown away with how different each of those performances are. And so I never quite know what's going to happen next. How do you guys know what's going to happen next?
We don't necessarily. It's we plan for things differently, and each person works in a different way, speed, sound, form, you know? And no one in the band is exclusively there to be a musician. Each person in the band has their own role as more than one discipline. So it's a multidisciplinary project in the best kind of sense of the word, that everybody's allowed to bring all of their skills and idiosyncrasies, and it leads to a lot of like complications and arguments and schedules and whatever. But when you put it on the stage, the 1 hour that is on the stage is this like total harmony that is created by the chaos of 8 people being able to kind of blah their art on each other, and it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. But for example, Alex, who is our dancer, is there also as a musician, but most of her work is taking the feelings that we want to convey and then turning that emotional dimension into something that the audience can just grasp, which is hard, right? So for her and I have long conversations about how we would feel to be a ghost, how we would feel to lose everything, how we would feel to acquire a new lover and haven't taken away. And like the new ethos of the band right now, because we're in a new album with a new ethos, is life is made up of the things that are taken away. So you start with this like imagine as a page, and then you get shapes cut out of that page. And those are the things that you have, but they're all like kind of always missing.
And they're just impressions.
They're just impressions and shadows. And that's in the ethos of this album, how it feels like to be a ghost.
Okay, so that last analogy that you used was a very visual analogy. I think that's the director in you coming through. How do you make that come through in your work on stage? Because there's a visual component to Mariachi Ghost, a very strong one.
Yeah. So Alex has developed this. We have different props, right? Alex has developed this for one of our tracks called Susana, this blind dance where she blinds herself and goes through the stage blind and dances blind, like with her eyes covered. And I think that gives that dimension to people that there's something missing, that she's not in control, right? And it's this like very painful, the way I see what a ghost would be is like a permanent delay, like you play with a delay pedal that has like, full feedback, and you can hear it forever, right? Whatever you play. And it keeps repeating it to itself and feeding back into itself. And that feedback becomes like this endless, louder, crazier note, wave, drone, whatever you want to call it. And so if you were
because it's multiplying by itself every time it hears, right?
And it becomes this crazy echo that is louder to itself, right? Like think about it when you look into a mirror that has a mirror behind it, and you can see an endless version of you going into infinity.
But you can't quite look at it because you're in the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what an emotion would be that would make a ghost, because a ghost is basically that a specific, true emotion that cannot leave whatever realm, right? And so her character for the song keeps repeating to herself all of these phrases that are actual phrases that you can't hear because the music is being played really loud, but there's intent in it, right? And so it's like she has dementia and she's talking to herself and listening to herself and then talking to herself, all while blinded, right? And so the audience don't necessarily know that all of these things are intentional, that when they're looking at them, but there's that emotional hook that is pulling them, right? Like shit, that's
because they're connecting
painful.
with performance
Yeah.
whether they understand its context or not.
Exactly. And they've seen this in so many different mediums, right? You either have a relative that suffers from dementia and you've seen this really painful thing happening to them, or you've seen them on movies, or and those feelings kind of build up the music. So the music is landing on this already kind of open heart, right? And so you're looking at a performance and then listening to music, and your brain's already kind of open to this new universe that where the music exists.
So there's your notion of reality and certainty and truth all sort of compressing together into this stage performance. What is your motivation for wanting to bring this feeling of uncertainty and this sort of parade of the dead to an audience?
Because I think that when you can visit other physical places, and that has a certain release for your mind, right? So you can travel to Toronto, and just because it's a change of scenery, you come back, you feel recharged. You can go to Mexico, tan for 2 weeks, and then come back and then feel recharged. I feel like you can do that with your emotions. It doesn't have to be your entire person that goes somewhere and comes back. And I think comic books give us that, and books give us that, and TV shows give us that, right? It's something where you can disconnect and exercise these feelings that are already in you, right? Give them a certain release, and then come back to your own part of reality and feel like you've exercised those things. So like you're always carrying sadness and anger, and you're always carrying happiness and joy in your heart, right? But you don't, they get in the way of each other if you don't exercise them all, right? And so if you can go visit sadness for 45 minutes, and if you can go visit sorrow for 45 minutes, and it doesn't have to be your sorrow, then you can come back and then experience your life and be like, I have it pretty good here.
We have come to visit you in peace and with goodwill.
Do you believe in ghosts?
No.
You don't believe in ghosts?
I don't believe in anything.
You don't believe in anything?
When we were talking about how when I was 16, I decided to cut out morality out of my life.
Right.
At the same time, I decided, a couple of years later maybe, I decided to cut belief out of my life. I don't need to believe anything. Right. I just like knowing. And when I don't know, I don't know. I just don't know. And there's so much joy in being able to say, I don't know. I'd like to know, but at least I know that I don't know, and that's a relief.
And yet, in that context, you and your creative partners in the band work hard, pontificate, meditate, and discuss ways in which you can bring an experience that you don't actually believe in to an audience.
Yeah.
Now, I am fascinated by the way that art as a creative object is separate from the creator. And I didn't think we would get there in this conversation, but here we are now. How do you square the circle of the things you make, people see a certain way? Because you're a filmmaker, you're a writer, you're a musician, and people see a lot of things in your work that is not present.
I feel like we're all made of stories that have been told to us, or we've experienced, or, like the family stories that are passed down generations after generations, right? My family stories are horrid ghost death stories. That's what my grandfather loved to tell, right? And there's so much beauty in the idea of the afterlife. And fiction is there kind of as a service for that, right? So you don't need to believe in the afterlife to understand what the afterlife means for this group of people or this group of people. And the afterlife is a truth, right? You can think that the afterlife is this, or you can think that the afterlife is this, and they can both have an incredible value in how you live your life, but you don't know, you don't know what's going to happen, but you can believe in either or, and that is storytelling. And this is the truest kind of sense of storytelling. It's a story that you tell to yourself, right?
About who you are.
About who you are and you can be like Catholics believe a certain amount of, of afterlife, and like my family is Catholic, right? And they like to think about afterlife in a certain way. And that is such a beautiful cultural expression, right? But the Catholics from Mexico don't believe the same as the Catholics from Italy, even though they're the same religion, right? Yeah. They're very different. The Catholics from Mexico have like all this other witchcraft and, indigenous knowledge and like Day of the Dead. You get to come back like once a year, you hang out, right? So all of those things are beautiful. Both of those things are beautiful. And so looking at them and being able to, free from believing them, being able to looking at them in an objective way and say, those things are fantastic. I want to tell all those stories. They're just there waiting to be told. How do I learn them and retell them? I feel like ghosts are the perfect vehicle for it because they don't need to be anything. They can be anything. They could literally be anything you want, right? It's such a, when you try to define ghost, and you ask anybody to say, what is a ghost? Define the word ghost.
Someone has an answer for it. And what's interesting about that question, there's a few questions you can ask people that when you want to divide the room, the ghost one is usually a good one. Mm-hmm. Between the abject deniers and the complete believers. Mm-hmm. And what usually separates them is their certainty based on experience.
Exactly.
Right? Some experience that they've had.
Yeah.
Right? I am certain, based on my experiences, that ghosts might be real. Now, I throw the might in there because...
You're certain there might be real?
I'm certain there might be real.
Because you've had things that have happened to you that
some
are ghostly.
Some very strange events, in the presence of other individuals as well. And so, while we all may have a different rationale for why it has occurred, it did occur as a shared experience that we can all say, hey, remember those few months where this really weird stuff happened?
But was it a measurable experience?
I think it was measurable. There was physical evidence after the fact. Mm-hmm. There was an increase. We were measuring. Okay, I have to tell the whole story? I can't tell the whole story, but I'll tell part of the story. In 2 different instances in my life, I am convinced that I lived in a haunted house. One was an old, it had been a converted courthouse in BC, which we found out after we looked at some records, after some weird things started happening, that they had hung people there originally. So this, of course, fed our belief that the weird stuff that was happening with the animals and with the nighttime noises and with things being moved into different places. Okay, it's just the unquiet spirits of these poor hung individuals, so we can cut them some slack. That's how we all actually kind of just said, okay, fine. You'd be mad too. You'd be restless too if this is how you ended. So, and then actually after we decided that, things sort of calmed down and we carried on with our everyday life. Fast forward a number of years. Again, I lived in a big old house. This one I owned with a buddy of mine, and we had, it was a 4-plex, so we had renters in all these different suites, which were separated by walls, but the house itself was this big old brick building that had used to belong to an old fire chief in 1906 here in Winnipeg. And a number of things started happening, and at the same time, so many of our friends that were living in the house, we were convinced that we were pulling pranks on each other. So what had started as, oh, this person is just moving this stuff around in the house, or this person is just doing that, and we don't know where all the keys are, and people, and it's like funny. And then we also were pulling pranks on each other. But one day we sat down, a whole bunch of us, and started comparing notes on things that each other had done to each other, and it turned out the vast majority of them were not, in fact, anything that had been perpetrated by any of us. And then my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, she came home and was very upset one day because she thought we were messing with her, but it turned out none of us had been home in the house at all. So there was a number of specific events that, to me, create an element of room for one type of truth in your truth pyramid that ghosts could be real. Can I ever know it in the sense of reality? I don't think I can ever know it. I can't go back to that same time, to those same experiences, but I can trust in the experiences of the people around me. And maybe we'll do a Halloween ghost episode, because there's some shattered mirror stories part of this, and some weird footprints in the house, and some odd touching that occurred at certain times. We'll tell you all of these stories later, or maybe I'll make a graphic novel about it.
As the Count turns into a monster and seeks his revenge.
The Mariachi Ghost started as a comic book.
Tell us about that.
So I was visiting Mexico right after I finished university. It's my last visit to Mexico after university. And I had been obsessed with this story that my grandpa used to tell me about El Charro Negro, who's this like, when you think of a mariachi, the clothes they're using is actually called charros. It's the dressing style of traditional Mexico, mostly Western Mexico, that you think of, with the sombreros and the boots, and they rode horses and whatever. And so El Charro Negro was this charro that rode the black horse and was wearing black clothes and had a machete or some sort of like bladed weapon and decapitated people that were unjust. So if you were some sort of a sinner, my grandpa called them sinners. If you were some sort of a sinner and you had raped a girl or whatever, something terrible, El Charro Negro might in the middle of the night come find you and cut your head off. And that's it. It's just a ghost that goes around, delivering justice.
Or vengeance.
Depends on how you see it. If you were the girl, probably justice. Right? If you were the dad of the guy that just got his head chopped off, vengeance. Totally different lens. And so I was obsessed with that. I was like, well, that's a superhero, right? Like, whether it's a real ghost or it's a person pretending to be a ghost and people think he's a ghost, that's basically Batman.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's a traditional story. Like, it's been there for hundreds of years, right? And so I was like, I want to make a comic book about that.
No, okay, so the story that comes to mind immediately for me in the sort of westernized tradition is the story of the Headless Horseman, right? But that has its, Irving, it has its origin point. We know where in history it was written down. Does this have a corresponding author, or is this like a...
There's no actual author that I can quote.
Right.
I found the story explained in this book of like traditional stories that I found from the University of Colima, where my mom grew up, my dad grew up, and my grandpa lived. So they had all these traditional stories that were told by old people. They go to old folks' homes and they ask the old folks to tell them traditional stories before they're forgotten.
Collect traditional knowledge, yeah.
And so there's like 12 12 books that have all these stories, right? The majority of them are, like tales with a moral, ending,
So like folk music, you can't really pin down where it started,
exactly.
But people know.
People just know. But this one, it was in three of the different books. 3 different old people decided that this was the story that they wanted to tell about El Charro Negro. And each story was a little bit different, right? Some of them, like, you can smell him coming because it smells like sulfur because he's from hell. Some of them, you can't, like, you just never know, and you can't walk by yourself at night. There's actually a statue to El Charro Negro in the middle of Colima. Like, somebody built a statue to this folk hero, that was like punishing the unjust. So it's like, I don't know specifically where it was created, but I know in the east of Mexico they don't have the same thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like mostly western middle Mexico.
So this inspired you to make a comic.
This inspired me to...
It's inspiring me to make a comic. So I don't know how I couldn't have done it to you.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to figure out who El Charro Negro was, right? And so I started looking at the history of Colima, the state, right? And it's got the biggest harbor in the west of Mexico, right? So it has the biggest harbor between San Diego and Buenos Aires. Like, it's like the biggest harbor in the Pacific, right? So all of the Chinese goods that have come to Mexico, and a lot of Chinese goods that came to North America, came through that harbor. And then I did not know that, but at the time, but when I started doing research, I realized that at one point there were 600,000 Filipinos living in Mexico. Huh. So there was a giant migration of Filipino people that came to Mexico and moved to that harbor first. And they brought the coconuts and the mangoes, which are like two intrinsical part of the identity of the Mexican West, right? Like, you can't really go to a beach in the west of Mexico without
without these things being foisted upon it.
Yeah. So, and they brought the salt trade. They taught the indigenous people of Mexico how to harvest the salt, right? So like all these super interesting things, right? But at the same time, the things that come from the Western coast are not just things from Asia, like China, the Philippines, Japan. All of these things were an influence in part of the culture. And actually, if you look at the people, phenotypically, they're more like Filipino people than the rest of Mexico in the state of Colima, Jalisco, Michoacan, which is where this coast is, which is super interesting. And also, we make the same kind of bread, right? They kind of cook the same kind of food. Simple things like eggs are traditionally made in a very specific way in the west of Mexico, right? Like the bottom of it has to be like almost burnt when you fry them, and they have to be like really fried, the same way that they're made in the Philippines. Very super interesting, right? And so I figured out that they had to be characters that carried that mantle, and maybe the main character had to carry that mantle, right? So I also figured out that there was probably a lot of people that came from Russia, which ended up being true. A lot of people that came from the Basque country, from Spain, from the other side of the world, that ended up moving into Colima and becoming the rulers of it because they were whiter, right? And so, but Spain is not just an easy configuration themselves, right? In Spain, there's the Gitanos, which are like the gypsies of Spain, the Roma of Spain, that are a really important part. And then Spain was 800 years who had been conquered by the Arabs, right? So it was like a caliphate. Like all of the southern Spain was a caliphate, right? And so they have all of this. That's where like what we think of as flamenco music came, the Arabica music came from, all of that stuff, right? So they themselves are a complicated mix, right? So the people that moved to Mexico from Spain when the conquest happened were people that had been cast out in Spain. They were the bottom of the bottom of the bottom, right? And they were sent to Mexico, and they were whiter or just more Spanish, not in every instance whiter, than the indigenous people of Mexico, and thus better. And so they were able to acquire a higher status. But if they had gone back to Spain, their status would have been back to low, right?
Right.
So they carried all this guilt and all this, like, things to overcome. And so I wanted to put all of that super complicated cultural construction into the comic book.
So when most people set out to create a comic book, they want an iconic character who like kicks criminals in the face. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of where the social commentary usually ends. Mm-hmm. My big problem with Batman is that it's essentially a class war comic where rich people are allowed to put on cool armor and then beat up poor people, but the poor people are only committing crimes because they don't have money. Mm-hmm. So if they put all the money that was put in their super suits into social programs, they wouldn't have to kick anyone in the face.
Yeah.
Right? So you wanted to put an entire cultural history into a character who chops people's heads off for justice?
Yeah, so I made him homeless. I made him somebody that had lost his life twice. When he was a kid, he lost his life and he got adopted by an Asian family that taught him, to live in the language, and they were immigrants themselves, and they taught him taught him Asian martial arts, a diversity of them, and he grew up with other Asian kids, right? So he has all this complicated cultural background from all of the immigrants that had come to Mexico. And then that gets taken away from him again, right? And so his psyche kind of fragments, and he doesn't quite know if he's dead or alive. And the only time that he feels alive is when he's fighting crime. The rest of the time, he's sure he's just a ghost, right?
And somehow this amazing comic book idea, which I have never held in my hand, became a band instead of a comic book.
I started writing the comic book and I was writing music at the same time, or playing music at the same time. And so some of the poetry that I was trying to put into the comic book started becoming lyrics for songs. And then I didn't have any time to do comic book because I was too busy playing shows and rehearsing for shows and building the ideas and the feelings that the comic book had into the band.
So I feel as a creative person, something that's really important for people to remember is that when they are not sure what to do, that they shouldn't eliminate anything. They should transmute it. They should, things you're not sure what to do with, just change it into something else that you're doing now and just keep that momentum moving. So it sounds very much like that's what you did. You just had this great motive force inside of you and you just turned it into music.
Unfortunately, I abandoned, all my notebooks with notes, and, they're somewhere in my basement hiding, waiting to.
But they're in you like that cutout, right?
Exactly.
They're in
Yeah,
you like that cutout. So,
they're something that got taken away.
yeah, if we shine enough light, the images will show through.
Hopefully. Yeah. And I think actually I had a meeting with you at Bar Italia.
Way longer. That's how many years ago is that now?
Maybe 10.
And you know what I took away from that? You told me a story then. They had a Spanish name, but you used the phrase night birds, which at the time, now this is interesting because we haven't spoken about this since then. And in my mind, I got this incredible vision of these like sort of midnight cloaked highwaymen who had kind of a Robin Hood sense of justice, but a sort of cowboy sensibility about them, these night birds. And to me, this iconic image has haunted me for a while. And I've wanted to make a night bird style character or story since that day. And now it's been rekindled. But somehow they have to show up in this, how do you pronounce it? The dark head cutting.
El charro negro.
Charro negro.
Uh-huh.
Okay. In Charro Negro's story, we need to have some night birds. Did I get the night? Do I remember the night birds?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's something that I like. Yeah, it's my dad. My dad used to say that all the time.
To watch out for the night birds.
Don't be a night bird.
Don't be a night bird.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like,
they sounded like pretty cool.
No. Well, that's what if your dad says don't be a night bird. You know, you're like, okay, well, that's my next band. I guess. The Night Birds.
To heighten the horror, shock your senses, chill your brain.
I'm fascinated by the idea that this comic book started a musical career for you, and this visual storytelling that's in you turned you into a director, I think.
I think so, and I think it was after film school. Like, I went to film school because I wanted to learn more about how to make films and how to. I went to U of M because in U of M they teach you how to think about films. They don't necessarily teach you how to make the films per se, but they teach you how to read about films, how to write about films, how to think about films. They sharpen your brain for you in a way, right? All the things that you needed to read, they show them to you, and then all the films that you needed to watch.
They give you some tools, and if you're smart, you go and use them, and if you're not, you put them in a drawer, and you say, "Oh, I have these tools."
And then get another degree, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Which is fine also, you know. You can't really have... I believe firmly that you can't really have enough degrees. Like if you have enough money to go take another degree,
yeah, you should for sure. Yeah, never be afraid of knowledge.
Whatever,
for
awesome,
sure, yeah,
great, sweet. So I got a comic book that was an essay about comic books, and I don't remember what it was, but you probably have both read it. It's this. It's. Man, I wish I
Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics.
Yeah. It's
got to be, yeah. As Jorge showed me the thickness between his two fingers, I knew it exactly. Which one.
And it talked about sequential imaging, right? Yeah. And I had just come out of studying anthropology. That was my minor in university. And my last year, I took a course called Art, Symbols, and Culture, which talked about...
Oh, those two books. Those, yeah. That's exactly the right time to read that book, which
right?
is all about semiotic language and how you create emotion through visual storytelling. That is static, though, not moving, which is different because film, you have that great moment of performance. You can have 2 or 3 seconds where a human emotes a feeling and you feel it across that great divide of time and place, and that's film magic. When comics pull that off, I think it's doubly magical because they don't have motion.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have like practical motion.
Yeah, right.
Right, but this closure, which is what I loved about that book, is that the white space in between the frames of a comic book is literally where the magic happens.
Right, the space between beats, between moments, where your brain fills in everything and what you're supposed to feel.
And that's awesome, and that is how magic works.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's how Houdini made his living from the concept of closure. I don't think he had necessarily the wits or the sophistication intentionally. He was a really unsophisticated person intentionally, but to think about it in like a philosophical way of like.
Hold on, let me come back because I like talking about magic and Houdini in particular. Yeah. You say he was unsophisticated intentionally.
Yeah, Houdini. So Houdini was.
Because I think David Blaine the same way. He's unintentionally. Or he's intentionally unsophisticated.
But I think that you need that persona for people not to think that you're too smart and that you're actually pulling a fast one on them.
Right. Yeah, if people think, oh, here comes a clever guy.
Yeah, and
it
Houdini
must be a trick.
Was a thug.
Yeah.
Like he had hoodlums that like came around with him and beat people up, and like he broke people's fingers that were stealing his tricks or like seemingly stealing his tricks. He thought they maybe stealing his tricks. And
you know what's great about this is I've read a lot about Houdini and I've heard a lot about this stuff, and you know Houdini came through Winnipeg at one point.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of that is a story that he crafted to give himself credit. I would, because when you look hard at the people who got their fingers broken, they're hard to, you don't find them. There is nobody who is like, oh, I was the great Mesmo and I stole a Houdini trick and he had my fingers broken.
You may be right. And the other thing is Houdini was part of the Scientific American Council.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
the greatest magicians of their age.
Basically. I'm right now I'm working on a movie, on a script with Carolyn Gray, who is a writer from here that wrote a play called The Elmwood Visitation, which is about ghosts, about spiritualism. And so Winnipeg was a great center for spiritualism. And that brought Sir Arthur Conan Doyle here for a seance, right? With the lady that was the lead medium in her time, and she was being studied by a doctor here in Winnipeg, D.G. Hamilton, who was the leading psychic researcher in the world, right? Who also lived in Winnipeg in Elmwood, and the house is still there. You can go to the Hamilton house, and there's no more ghosts there or anything, but just, you know, the house is there.
Or is there?
Well, it's on Henderson, so I don't know if you want to live there if you're a ghost, or you want to maybe move to Osborne Village or something. Probably a better option. But so Houdini spent years of his later life trying to disprove Margaret, the lady that the medium, right? He spent years of his her actual name was Wilmina, but her husband asked her to change her name.
Yeah, right. And the notion was
to
that
immigrant
once that he believed or wanted to believe that his mother was waiting for him. And all these people kept promising, "Oh, I'll connect you with your mother. I'll connect you with your mother." And then he just started debunking them.
But he would see the tricks happening in front of him, and he'd be like, "Dude, that's a trick. This is what I do for a living."
Yeah.
And so, and that trip to our film plays that trip to Winnipeg from Houdini, the trip to Winnipeg for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and then the Scientific American Council meetings where they decided whether Wilmina was the world's one true medium or not, and where Houdini actually was sitting in the council trying to disprove her, and they forced her to try to pull one of Houdini's hardest tricks, the milk can escape, and she could not. And then when she could not, and they released her from it, they found this like extendable ruler in her hair, and so she was disproven that she could, but she was she was the world's greatest magician along with Houdini, except her magic was for a different reason.
Right.
Right? She wanted to help you communicate with your loved one on the other side or whatever. And she was a fraudster.
Right.
But her tricks took just as much wit.
Okay, but hold on. Let me come back now around.
Yeah.
Do you think she was a fraudster, or do you think she was just presenting people with the truth they wanted?
Presenting people with truth they want is a fraud.
Oh, but people are entitled to their truth. We started here at the truth pyramid, didn't we?
They're entitled to their truth.
Right.
But the moment you profit from giving them that, or seemingly giving them that, because you can also lie to them.
Because isn't she just becomes their clergy at that point?
In a way, yeah. She wanted to start her own religion.
Right.
Because no taxes.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure L. Ron Hubbard probably studied some of what she was thinking.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, and the spiritualist religion was in Winnipeg was pretty strong. Like, even after the fraud was demonstrated,
it remains strong today. There's a lot of people in that community.
And Carolyn, the writer that wrote the play that we're now turning into a script for a movie, has had death threats from spiritualists that are like, well, you can't say that Wilmina was lying. Like, yes, I can actually. There's proof.
Right.
It's been proven. Not only was it proven back then, there's been more and more evidence since There's literally no evidence that she was telling the truth. So just like based on that, no, but we'll kill you.
But coming back around, if you don't have, you can't possibly claim to know more about reality than they do. So this burden of proof,
yeah,
right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't require it the same way that you
They don't require it. I require it.
Right.
Right? So that I whether know or not know, right? But they can believe in spiritualism. You can believe a lie, right? Even though it's like very obviously a lie. Like we all believe in the value of money.
Right, but it's a complete fallacy. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And we practice that every day.
Yeah.
Right?
It's amazing trying to explain to my kids. Like they immediately understand that money has no real value. Mm-hmm. That it's just a I try to explain to him like, well, it's more like a promise.
Yeah.
I'm like, but Dad, sometimes people break their promises. It's like, yeah, kid, you got it figured out.
Yes, entire countries that suffer from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like where I'm on my father's side, I'm from Belarus, and their currency was reset to zero more than once within my lifetime. So people who had all their money stored in the banks, one day they woke up to find that nothing, valueless, and they're resetting the currency. And so any money you had physically, worthless. Any money you had in the bank, worthless. Starting from scratch today, got to go to work because you have zero.
The problem that I see with that is that there's no guarantee, zero guarantee, that that's not going to happen to us.
Right. But we believe that everything is fine.
Yeah.
And so we carry on.
But we don't know. This is my thing of like, go to the bank, like, hey, we'd like to extend our mortgage or whatever, like, okay, here's their interest rates. Like, this is all like, we're all just dancing with it, right?
That's
like,
right. Yeah. It's like a levitating table at a seance.
It is. That's entirely it. It's like this is just a dance that we're doing so that I can continue to live in my house.
Yeah.
Right. And continue to have a job. And it's great. But I have a machete under my bed. So if you come to take my house, you know what I'm saying? It's like the tangibility of like the stories of my grandfather. It was like, and then the thieves came, right? And your cousin got up, and they shot him in the night. Yeah. And then all of the other cousins went and they found the thieves in the mountain, and they killed them. And then the peace reigned in the town again.
Stay away from there, I'll shoot!
So I've dedicated a very large portion of my life to storytelling.
Yeah.
Right? I've done some theater work. I've done some TV work. But comics is that's where my heart is entirely. But what I want to do now, what I've been working at doing now, is making stories that have more relevance within a reflection on my own life. So the first kind of comics I made were, I called action adventure stories or, superhero stories or whatever. And more as I look at what I can use the medium for, it becomes an exploration. So I just did a book called Medicine, which is about the real emotional cost of a life working in medicine. It's co-written by Gillian Horton. I interviewed surgeons and doctors and people in the medical profession about the real cost of being a doctor. And then I worked with Dave Robertson on Will I See. Him and Isque had a story about missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, and they invited me to come on and work on this story. And in my wildest dreams of, 10-year-old Gregory, when I said, when I'm all grown up, I'm going to make comic books. I think 10-year-old Gregory was thinking of ROM Space Knight as a profession, and 40-year-old Gregory now sees the real power of that storytelling. And I think I'm hearing that in you too, that the young version of you was inspired by these larger than life characters. But when you're putting your active life energy into your work, it comes out in a much more complicated way than just some guy chopping up criminals.
Yeah, I guess it always has to be, right? We always get the story when we get the story about the guy chopping up a bunch of criminals in the news or whatever, right? We always get the story, and it's always the little bits of a story that kind of don't matter, like the facts of what happened.
Right.
Like there's the bomber guy right now that bombed the lawyer,
right?
And they sent bombs to his wife and whatever. Like we are hearing all those facts, right? And by no means this sound like I'm defending him. We don't know how he felt. We don't know what demons were going in his mind, and I'm not blaming the demons either.
Right.
It's all his fault. What was happening to him that made him go that nuts to send bombs over the mail? Like,
over the mail.
He couldn't just blown up the lawyer. Like, he put it in the mail. Like, he risked so many thousands of lives.
Yeah.
So stupid.
So, okay, so
Yeah.
why do you think,
Yeah.
do that? So my wife and I were watching a documentary series yesterday. I convinced her to do it in full disclosure. I said, hey, look, a Bigfoot documentary series. We should totally watch this. And she was, she was a little under the weather, and her resistance was worn down, and so she acquiesced. But I wish I could remember the exact name of it. The third episode of it, actually, they did DNA testing for this Russian supposed Neanderthal woman that had been captured by in the 1840s and held captive, and she gave birth to these 3 children. And the story was that this Neanderthal, that there was a line of genetic material that they could track, and so they found the great grandchildren, and they tested their DNA. And they did a bunch of research, and they tried to figure out, was there in fact this wild woman, Neanderthal offspring that was loose in the woods? An engaging story from a mythological standpoint. And they did not shy away from the truth at the end, which I was shocked, because I was expecting a sensationalized Bigfoot story. Instead, through DNA testing, they realized that an African woman had been taken captive and kept as a sex slave in this oligarch's mansion, and that in order to sort of protect their own integrity, the community had created this story that she was a monster so that they could handle the fact that they knew it was going on within their own community. And we as human beings, I think, would rather, for example, this story of the dark horseman who chops off villains' heads. Probably that was just somebody's uncle, right? Who went and killed a rapist, and then people were like, wow,
Yeah.
that's probably not
Johnny, can you do it again?
Yeah, can you do it again?
Somebody stole my car.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? That we want to tell stories that are larger than life in order to distance ourselves from reality. But my favorite thing about science fiction and about genre fiction, and partially why I make these things and partly why we make this podcast, is because science fiction, speculative fiction genre isn't about the future or the ancient past. It's about the present day. It's people talking about things now in a way that's more comfortable and palatable to have a broad discussion about.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I feel like all sorts of genre storytelling stems from a desire to teach society something that society hasn't been able to figure out how to look at itself in that way.
Now, do you think, I know in my own sake, I don't usually have the answer. I just want to talk about it. And so I will create a story that allows me to have that discussion without necessarily saying, this is what Gregory thinks about it. How do you do that in your own work?
That's a good question. The reason I liked comic books when I was 6 years old or 7 years old is because I was a super skinny bullied kid that found solace in the fact that these heroes could fight back, right? And they had the power of saying no. They have the power to point fingers back and push back to the the meanies around. And then my dad put me in karate classes since I was 5 or 6. And then notoriously filled up the bottom of my backpack with a bunch of stones so that I would carry a heavy backpack for the whole year. My dad's that kind of a guy. He also went to karate classes himself. And that gave me the power that those heroes had to defend themselves.
So do you think this was a will to suffer with dignity? Like what I think, in the classic comic book trope characters, Daredevil was always my favorite growing up.
Yeah.
He was, and I got into him as a young kid during the Frank Miller run. So there was a lot of stuff over my head at that time. Super dark. But that he would get beat down.
Yeah.
Right. Essentially, he's bullied all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Same kind of thing. But he would get up with dignity despite the black eye and the torn face, and he'd put his suit on, and he'd go to work as a public defender. And then at night he'd go and do it again. Yeah. So is that what you hoped for yourself?
I think what I hoped for myself was to be able to not let other people, and this is like the weird part, not let other people feel what I was feeling when I was being bullied because of the comic books. So I feel like I felt that I could be a hero, and that was a great feeling. Like at 6 or 7 years old, it was entirely a dream of my own that I could just like, somebody was going to bully the girl I liked, and then I was going to beat the crap out of them because I could all of a sudden. Right. But I do feel that feeling gave me the idea that we do need the heroes to be there to inspire people to stand up for themselves or others. Right. And at one point during the 60s and 70s...
So then genre matters, fiction matters, is what you're saying.
It matters very much. And like I feel like the reason I don't like postmodernism, and we can have an entire other huge conversation about how I dislike postmodernism, even though I like a lot of postmodern works, is because I feel like this anti-hero and this like the flexible value system where like, and by all means it needs to be there, but whereby heroes are always flawed, which is true. It made the hero kind of irrelevant and unnecessary. And it made for bystander culture where you're just watching people suffer without doing anything about it, right? And I feel like as naive and self-aware as it was in the 1940s and 50s when we had this first comic book, even 30s, this first comic book heroes like Superman in the 30s, right? Like all of a sudden there's a hero, right?
Superman occupies a different space though, I think, because the heroes at that time in pulp literature were these masked wealthy people, right? Who would often go away to the mystic East and come back with some forbidden knowledge.
Bruisers, like,
right? Yeah, they would just punch people. But then here comes Superman, who has actual powers. Yeah. Right? And it sets him apart. He pretends to be a person. Yeah. Right?
Has to pretend.
But is a super being, as opposed to these people who pretend to be super beings. Right? And this, I think, is more of what you're talking about. Like, when Superman arrives on the comic book scene, you see an explosion on the newsstand. It is wildly successful, and there are hundreds of Superman analog characters that show up on the newsstand. And I think it's not coincidental of what was going on in the world at the same time. I mean, we know that the pulps were used as a propaganda tool. We know that. But the ones that became popular and endured beyond that pulp system are these larger-than-life heroes that do set an example that none of us could ever stand up to, but we're inspired by.
Black Tube, Barada, Nikto.
And we were talking about these Mexican characters earlier, right? The Mexican comic books. Right. Both of them, there's Calimán and then Chanok. So Calimán is this guy that goes to India to find himself in meditation and yoga and martial arts and comes back and solves a whole bunch of crimes. And then Chanok is this indigenous Mexican that lives in the jungle where there's still jungle. And he kind of sometimes goes to the city and solves crimes and then goes back to his traditional ways. Both of those characters are about how every single one of us has the capacity to be superhuman, to have those abilities, to like make yourself stronger, to make yourself wiser, to access that in yourself, to improve the world, right? And so we just choose not to, out of whatever emotion we choose not to, right? But Calimán doesn't have any superpowers per se, right? But he has the power of self-actuation because he knows how to meditate, right? And this is not how meditation works about in real life at all, right? But he can will himself stronger and like think about how strong he can be, and then he actually does work out, you know, and so he happens to be pretty strong. And so all of a sudden he's stronger than most people, and people are, you know, impressed or scared by him, and they either just run away or try to fight him. But you know, he knows how to fight, so he can do these things. He trained himself into this justice seeker character, right? And Chanok lives in the jungle, survives, you know, fights with tigers all the time. So whenever there's a criminal trying to punch him in the face, like, dude, I was with a tiger earlier, right? It's like, calm down. Just give me the money. I'll just go return it to the bank. they're simpler, naive characters, but I feel like they tell you as a person that you can, if you try, be more like Superman.
So how do we, though, change that narrative? You and I, we're creative people. We're going to make some new books.
Yeah.
Even this story even the example you gave where he returns the money to the bank.
Yeah.
Right? Even at our greatest, our superhero stories are still capitalist colonizer stories. Right? No matter what you do, make sure you get that money back to the bank.
Yeah.
Because that's where it belongs.
I think what we were lacking is nuance. I think that Superman, he came out of nuance, right? He was a Jewish immigrant that created it, that felt this dude should exist, right? He's an immigrant, right? That just happens to be, today's Samson, and he fights back.
Yeah.
The nuance disappeared because the market didn't want it, right? And I think, one of the reasons I didn't continue with the Mariachi Ghost is because there's so much nuance in the comic book with the cultural background and the post-colonial status of Mexico and all these new immigrants coming into the old Mexico that has been so romanticized.
How will you fit that into 100 pages of comics, right?
And it's complicated, right? But if we can put that into our work, then all of a sudden that inclusion is going to fight back against our perception, which I think is necessary. We do live in a post-colonial country, right? Yeah. Very obviously, and I came from a even more post-colonial country than Canada, where in Canada the indigenous people still exist.
Right.
In Mexico they got decimated, right? Or they got ingested into the I'm part indigenous Mexican, right? Everybody in Mexico. But now they're a legend. They're not people that you can go talk to.
Right.
Right? So how do we decolonize storytelling without nuance?
Ladies and gentlemen, this incredible conversation has been a unexpected high point in the podcast. I may have to edit out where I picked favorites, but perhaps not. We have been here talking with a filmmaker, a philosopher, a musician. Jorge, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
And I feel like this conversation definitely requires a part 2, so to be continued.
Anytime.
Until then, I encourage all of you to join the fight and make comics.